I hate you, but please don't leave me. Oh, but I can't stand you, and yet please don't go away. Don't leave me here on my own. How infuriating and destabilizing are both of these positions. If you've ever had someone keeping you in this loop of mixed messages or confusing communications, you know how infuriating it is. But what if it's all happening in your own mind? What if you're caught in the double projections of self-idealization and self-demonization in the same day? You can flip-flop or pendulum between very loving, very self-affirming, very positive messages, and yet in the same day also have deeply shameful, deeply destructive, and overall very regressive thoughts and stories. How do we find the middle point? Because I often receive questions like this one, where we're looking at these mixed messages between very positive projections and very negative projections, and the confusing aspect for me is how can it happen at the same time? What is it about the human psyche that allows us to see the best and the worst in people, things, and situations, and not quite separate out the contradictions? How do we learn to live with paradox? Because the actual solution is to embrace that, let's be real, nothing is black and white. There is no fundamentally good person and no fundamentally bad person. So when we apply the psychology of double projection to ourselves, we start to become a little bit more grounded. We start to accept our own limitations, and the fundamental invitation for this video is to try and find a way to both deflate yourself and inflate yourself at the polarities of your identity. I don't want you to be grandiosely self-inflating to the point of believing that you are God's gift on this planet. Yes, you are. In a certain degree, we are all touched by divinity, but you're not God's gift on this planet to strut through the streets like every single footstep that you leave is paved with gold. But also, if you ever have this narrative of believing that you are the worst thing ever and no one has ever been more pathetic or more disgusting or more downright evil than you in a certain moment or a certain thought, a certain thing that you do when no one's watching, they're both overcharged positions. We need to deflate you and inflate you depending on the sides which are getting triggered. But why does this happen? Let's bring something practical in for this video. Why do we end up in a situation where our psyche can expand so rapidly and so unstably in both directions almost instantly? Well, surprise, surprise, it usually comes from our childhood origin story, when we were in situations as a little boy or a little girl when we wanted love from our parents, love from our teacher, love from our friends, those first friends when we're vulnerable, 4, 5, 6 years old, and we are given mixed messages where supposedly mommy says I love you, but the look on the face is I love you, I love you so much. Or maybe dad says that, hey, shut up and stop playing around, and it's all confusing because he's smiling but he's also saying something very hurtful. All of those mixed messages that are programmed into us from our earliest years, from teachers, friends, and primarily our parents, they start to form a disjointed and fragmented psyche where it can often be quite difficult to realize, oh, this is actually still continuing in my adult life. I'm still having these private narratives where, yes, I've been healing some of my negative self-talk. I'm not so hard on myself anymore. My inner child has a degree of freedom and a degree of healing, but I'm still caught in this unpredictable regressive spiral to a very shameful, equally untrue position, and it's because the middle point has yet to be achieved, because the middle point wasn't encouraged or stabilized in your childhood. This is generalizing. It's not this way for most people. In my own story, when I've started to work through these very intense inflation, self-deflation, and inflation dynamics, it's usually tied back to a certain narrative. If I get very arrogant and start feeling overly charismatic and like I truly am the lever of diamonds wherever I go, I do that on my nose and diamonds come out, or maybe I cough into the air and it materializes into money, that kind of feeling of wherever I go, I am the best thing ever. It's only a limited number of minutes or hours, or maybe at a stretch a number of days, before predictably you will come to the crash and the very wonderful position that most people find themselves in. It's not wonderful at all, it's actually quite tragic, is that they will maintain the external persona of grandiosity, and then behind closed doors they will have shame-based shutdowns that are defined by addiction and emotional collapse. These are the kinds of people who can show up with confidence and charisma, and overall just you wouldn't know what they're actually like behind closed doors, because if you would see them behind closed doors, the psychic energy needs to compensate and the shameful shutdown is inevitable. You flip the situation on its head, you meet someone on the street and they're really shut down like this, and they're really in like a victim mindset, and they just nothing goes my way, and it's this president's fault, and it's this country's fault, and it's this group of people's fault, and it's on my mom's fault as well. And they might seem like a victim. It might seem like they're in the most shame-based, shut-down, pseudo-false self negativity imaginable, but secretly, somewhere in their psyche, if you really spend time with these people, they have a certain narrative of grandiosity. They have the grandiose victim complex, and they wear their victimhood like an achievement. There's a self-inflation even within the artificial deflation of believing that they're worthless. It's a very particular dynamic. Both of these examples, the grandiosity that swings into victimhood, and the victimhood that has that tainted sapling of grandiosity, that black tree growing out of the sludge, at least they're experiencing growth. But the foundation over here is made out of trauma, and the inflated clouds are also made out of trauma. How can we just heal the trauma at both ends and find some kind of healthy middle point? The honest answer, it is as simple as just being honest with yourself. You might not be as good as you think you are, but that's only the advice I would give to someone who is rather arrogant, or their leaning is towards arrogance, or their leaning is towards excessive cockiness, or maybe you're actually better than you think you are. That's the kind of advice that I give to someone who's in a shame-based shutdown. I can't be specific for a video like this. The love-hate projection, the I hate you, don't leave me, mixed messages, mixed signals that anyone would send externally fundamentally comes from an internal, unresolved core of instability and unstable emotional processing. These people lack the ability to form a coherent narrative which flexibly moves across the spectrum of emotion, the spectrum of positive and negative, without becoming overblown or dramatically undercharged, because if you take this too far, you end up in the world of angels and demons, and they're gonna do this kind of gesture where the angels come down and you get fixated. This is a lot of spiritual bypassing. Or the demons come up and you're terrified and you're paranoid. Both ends of the spectrum, you're leaning towards schizophrenic territory, which begins at its most innocent form with forms of fragmentation and dissociation. I'm not saying that someone who sends love-hate projections and mixed messages is schizophrenic, don't get me wrong. I'm talking about how certain illnesses and certain diseases and mental health challenges, they start to progress over time. That schizophrenic leaning, that fragmented psyche, that inability to walk in the middle ground, it starts in childhood, but it can be healed in adulthood. You just need to be aware and catch yourself when you start going one way, when you start sinking another way, and reality test, is this actually true? Do I really hate myself this much? Or am I loving a version of myself which is actually a bit of a false self, a bit of a mask that I'm trying to put on to appear larger and stronger and more competent than I actually am? It requires honesty, it requires a level of integrity, and unfortunately very few people, even people who are watching this video, are actually going to be able to catch the majority of moments where they're inflating or deflating on either side, and I know this because I still struggle with this. It's not a daily occurrence, it's not something which is keeping me up at night, but usually we'll find out the day after or the week after from that mood when the elated mood finally subsides, or the deflated, depressive tendency suddenly breaks free and you're back to more of a happy baseline. You start to get these little reminders, oh, they're both a little bit false, they're both a little bit, were they even true? Did I just let that mood take a hold of me? Was the mood of being uplifted or the mood of getting mopey something which just took over. And if you've got trauma in your system, if you've got a lot of unresolved trauma attached to either end of the spectrum, you really need to do the trauma work to start clearing out those patterns. There's a variety of books I've recommended on this channel, in fact over 200 at this point, which you can check out. Number one invitation for this video: how to stop sending mixed messages. You need to be clear about where you go on the spectrum, your baseline towards grandiosity or your baseline towards victimization. You start compensating in the opposite direction, but catch yourself before you go too far, and eventually you'll end up in that +1, 0, -1, 0, +1, 0, 0.5, 0, 0.5, that healthy middle range between charge in either direction. That's a really healed baseline. You're not expecting that you'll permanently fix your psyche in the sense of never having a delusional mixed projection, but you will be protected from these very unstable, very unreliable positions where you see someone for the first time and you believe that they're one or the other, because your psyche will no longer be projected outwards and you will stop seeing angels and demons in the outer world because you no longer see them in your inner world. And I mean that metaphorically, but maybe some people would say there's a literal component of the unseen etheric realm. That's not the topic for this video. Hopefully you get my point. Just stabilize in that middle point. Try and find a way to walk between the worlds and just watch for the fascination. Watch for the projections in either direction, and you will experience a much higher quality of internal peace, because the ground won't be shifting all the time. And that's all I can do for one video. I'll see you on the next one.